I grew up in Oregon, in a small town surrounded by dense pine forests. When I was a kid, those woods felt like a second home. My friends and I would spend hours exploring the trails, building forts, and daring each other to venture deeper than we ever had before. But one night, when I was 17, something happened that made me swear I'd never set foot in those woods again. It was the middle of July, and my buddy Drew had this idea to go camping out by Devil's Hollow, a clearing deep in the forest, maybe a 3-hour hike from the nearest road. The place had a bit of a reputation in town. People said weird things happened there, and some locals swore it was cursed. Of course, being a group of overconfident teenagers, we didn't take any of it seriously. There were 4 of us, me, Drew, Marcus, and Kyle. We left around noon, carrying way too much gear for a one-night trip. The hike was tougher than we expected, and by the time we reached Devil's Hollow, the sun was already low in the sky. The clearing was eerie, dead silent, except for the occasional snap of a twig in the distance. The tall pine trees around us seemed to lean inward, like they were closing us off from the rest of the world. We set up camp, made a fire, and spent the evening swapping ghost stories and drinking cheap beer Marcus had stolen from his older brother. Around midnight, things started to get weird. It started with the sounds. At first, it was just little things, a distant rustling, like an animal moving through the underbrush. But then it got closer, heavier, more deliberate. It wasn't like a deer or a raccoon. Whatever it was, it moved with purpose, circling just beyond the light of our fire. Kyle kept insisting it was probably a bear, but none of us believed that. The thing never made any grunting noises. No heavy breathing. No snuffling like you'd expect from a bear. It was quiet. Too quiet. Then it mimicked us. I swear to God, I heard my own voice coming from the darkness. At first, it was subtle. A laugh that sounded exactly like mine, but twisted, stretched out, slow and unnatural. There was Drew's voice, calling out from the trees. "Hey guys, over here." But Drew was sitting right next to me. We all froze. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and our breathing. Drew's face went pale and he whispered, "You heard that too, right?" Marcus grabbed the hatchet we brought for firewood and shone his flashlight toward the tree line. But the beam didn't reach far before being swallowed by the dense forest. For a moment, everything went still, and then something stepped into the light. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with grayish, mottled skin stretched thin over a skeletal frame. Its face, if you could call it that, was an impossible mess of human and animal features. Long, stringy hair hung over empty, sunken eyes, and its mouth was too wide, filled with jagged yellow teeth. But the worst part was that it was wearing Kyle's hoodie, the same exact one he had in his pack. None of us had ever screamed like that before. We bolted, no plan, no direction, just pure survival instinct. I don't even remember grabbing my flashlight or pack. The only thing I cared about was getting as far away from that thing as possible. The forest was pitch black, and in our panic, we got separated. I remember crashing through branches and slipping on rocks, the thing's heavy footsteps behind me, sometimes close, sometimes distant. Every so often, it would call out in one of our voices, "Help, I'm hurt," or "Wait up, man." But I knew better. After what felt like hours, I stumbled onto a logging road, half delirious and covered in scratches. I collapsed there, too exhausted to move. It wasn't long before headlights appeared, and an old forest ranger named Jim picked me up. I don't even remember what I said to him, just bits and pieces about the thing in the woods. He got me back to town and called in a search party. They found Drew and Marcus the next morning, both alive, though Marcus had a deep gash in his arm from falling during the escape. Kyle they never found. But here's the part that keeps me up at night. A week later, one of the searchers, an older guy named Pete, went missing while looking for clues near Devil's Hollow. The only thing they found was his flashlight and a scrap of cloth from Kyle's hoodie. Since then, no one's gone back there. The Forest Service eventually sealed off the old trail leading to the hollow, claiming it was due to dangerous wildlife activity. But people in town know better. Sometimes, on still nights, hikers near that part of the forest claim to hear voices. Familiar ones, calling out from the darkness. I haven't stepped foot in those woods in over 10 years. And I never will.
The biting cold of the night air hit me the very moment I stepped out from the comforting warmth of the cabin. The moon hung low, casting silvery shadows that danced eerily among the gnarled trees. It was supposed to be a getaway, a means of escaping the chaos of everyday life. Instead, as I glared into the darkness beyond our patch of light, suddenly the woods seemed to come alive, almost sentient, swallowing the sounds of my friend's laughter behind me. "Are you coming?" Matt yelled from the cabin, his voice seeming to reverberate off the deep forest. I hesitated, staring into thick brambles bordering our clearing, thick with tangled roots and interwoven branches that cast strange shapes in the moonlight. "Yeah, just give me a second," I replied, forcing a smile as I turned toward him. The plan was simple: hike deeper into the woods, do some stargazing, and then head back out into the warmth of the fire. I had done the particular hike a dozen times before, but this time felt different. The air was too still, too charged. Then, that unsettling feeling of being watched began to creep into the back of my mind. I rummaged through my backpack for a flashlight, feeling the chill crawl up my spine as my fingers grazed the cool metal of a small camping knife. As I made my way into the forest, the trees stood threateningly like sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. The distant chirping of crickets abruptly ceased as I ventured further away from the cabin. Probably just my imagination, I thought, shaking my head to dispel the ghostly chill which had taken residence in my chest. After a 10-minute walk, I emerged into an open area that was at the same time enchanting and forbidding, open sky full of stars. The kind of place where ancient tales of horror are whispered by leaves. I switched my flashlight on and its ray cut through the darkness like a knife. My heart was beating fast while I began to circle around. The woods seemed to breathe, shifting in unnatural ways that the wind whipped by with little greeting whispers, instead coming out as sharp hisses. I sat on a log lying on the ground, trying to steady my nerves. It was quiet now, too quiet. The laughter from the cabin had muted into a muffled memory, and I desperately wanted to go back inside, but my legs seemed stuck to the spot. I had an undeniable feeling that something was standing beyond the trees, just waiting for that opportune time to pounce. Just as I was getting up, I heard something soft rustling in a generally leftward direction, deeper in the woods. "Matt, is that you?" I called, trying to keep the quaver out of my voice. Silence fell, heavy and malarial, settling around me like a tourniquet. I could feel the blood draining from my face. Then it came again, this time louder. A slow, purposeful crushing of leaves. The shadows lengthened further as I turned my flashlight in that direction, and my heart violently thudded against my rib cage as the light fluttered erratically, casting wild shadows across the trees. I rummaged my surroundings. Just the wind, I muttered to myself, clenching the knife tightly in my sweat-soaked palms. But the sounds grew louder, clearer, like footsteps. I finally summoned the courage to rise to my feet. Something was after me, and I knew it, an instinctive terror tearing at my sanity. I cast the light to my left once more. The beam buckled, showing only swirling darkness defined by the trees. I was suddenly very conscious of how far into the woods I had gone. "Seriously, guys, this isn't funny," I yelled again, hoping for just about any sound in response. Slowly, I began to back up, my flashlight held firm. But nobody laughed, nobody answered. All I could hear was the ragged sound of my breathing and crunching that sounded like it moved with me. Just about the time I thought I was back in safely, a shape broke the tree line beside me. My heart arrested. An animal? A trick of the light? Then it was there, a giant form, considering and silent, watching me from the cover of darkness. I could hardly see its features, but its eyes. They glowed unnaturally, fixed on me as if weighing me. I stumbled back in alarm, falling to the ground. The flashlight flickered once more and then went out, plunging me into the dark. I scrambled, afraid even the slightest movement would reveal a hiding self. I took a deep, shaky breath, listening intently as the creature stepped closer, moving with deliberation, unnatural silence. Just when I thought I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears, the silence shattered with a blood-curdling scream. My friends had come looking for me. The terror that I felt turned to anger mixed with fear. I had put them in danger too. I sprang to my feet, not caring if the creature was close. I ran in the direction of their voices, shouting out my friends' names, and now the woods were some sort of maze filled with fear and panic. Finally, I found them, and then relief washed over me until I turned back for that last look. There was nothing but silent trees. No glowing eyes, no sound, just that residual dread something in that suffocating dark would always be watching. It wasn't until we were safely back in the cabin that I realized the silence in my heart hadn't lifted. Over the next several days, whispers went around amongst them as to what I had seen and heard. But I said nothing then and nothing afterwards either. I would not have dared utter the profundity of that terror, from some creature lurking just beyond the shadows. Even now, in the safety of everyday existence, I shun the woods. The thought of entering that isolation, knowing something akin to that could still be out there, waiting, sensing for the moment the darkness would take me again, well, those are terrors I don't care to endure. And each time the trees sway, whispering sweet nothings in the cool night breeze, I can almost hear that slow, deliberate crunching in the distance, waiting patiently for my return. I've always loved hiking. Growing up near the Blue Ridge Mountains, I'd spend weekends exploring trails, losing myself in the solitude of the woods. There's something about the quiet crunch of leaves underfoot, the smell of pine, and the occasional rustle of a deer that makes me feel alive. But last fall, I had an experience that still gives me chills whenever I think about it. It was early October, and the air had just started to cool down, perfect for a long solo hike. I decided to try a new trail I'd heard about, a lesser-known path cutting through a dense part of the forest that was supposed to lead to a beautiful overlook. I packed a small bag, filled my water bottle, and set out just after dawn. The trail was overgrown, a thin, winding path that cut through a thick carpet of fallen leaves. The first few miles were uneventful. The trees were tall and dense, and the further I went, the quieter it became. I hadn't seen another hiker since I started, but I was used to that. I liked it, actually. Just me and nature. But around midday, something started to feel off. I can't quite explain it, but the air felt different, heavier somehow. I noticed that the birds had stopped chirping. I remember thinking how odd it was because even in the deepest parts of the woods, you'd always hear something, a woodpecker, a distant crow. But there was nothing. Just silence. Then, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping sound. At first, I thought it might be a woodpecker, but the sound was too steady, too deliberate. It came from ahead, somewhere along the trail. I stopped and listened. Tap, tap, tap. It was slow, almost like someone was knocking on wood with a stick. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just an echo, a trick of the wind. But as I continued, the tapping grew louder. The path began to narrow, the trees crowding closer together, their branches forming a tangled canopy overhead. I started to feel a tightness in my chest, my breath coming in shallow bursts. The tapping seemed to follow me, always just a little ahead, just out of sight. I picked up my pace, trying to shake off the uneasiness that had settled over me like a blanket. But as I did, the sound quickened too. Tap, 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 tap. I stopped again, turning in a slow circle, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just trees and shadows. Then, something caught my eye, a small object hanging from a low branch, swaying gently in the breeze. It was a bundle of twigs, bound together with some kind of old, frayed string. It looked almost like a small, primitive doll. I felt a chill run down my spine. I'd heard of things like this before, old folk traditions, talismans, or warnings. I wasn't sure which, but the sight of it made my skin crawl. I reached out to touch it, but as soon as my fingers brushed against it, the tapping stopped. Complete silence fell over the forest, a silence so thick it felt like a physical presence pressing down on me. I dropped my hand and took a step back, my heart pounding in my ears. For a few moments, I stood there, staring at that little bundle, my mind racing. I felt exposed, like I was being watched. I shook my head, trying to dispel the irrational fear that was creeping up my spine. I needed to keep moving, needed to get to the overlook and then head back before it got dark. I continued down the trail, my senses on high alert. The air felt thick, suffocating. And then, I saw it, another bundle, hanging from a branch just ahead. This one was different, though. Larger, more elaborate. I felt a sudden urge to turn back, to abandon the hike and head home. But stubbornness got the better of me. I was just spooking myself, letting my imagination run wild. I pushed on. As I moved past the bundle, I heard it again. The tapping. Louder this time. Closer. I quickened my pace, practically jogging now, my eyes darting around the forest. The sound kept pace with me, always just ahead, like it was leading me somewhere. I don't know when I started running, but I did, my feet pounding against the dirt, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The tapping grew frantic, almost frantic, an erratic rhythm that made my heart race. I felt a panic building in my chest, my mind screaming at me to turn back, to run. The tapping didn't return, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out. And then, I saw it. Standing in the middle of the trail, maybe 50 feet ahead, was a man. At least, I thought it was a man. He was tall, dressed in a tattered coat, his face obscured by the shadows. He was holding something long in his hand, a stick, I realized, the source of the tapping. He wasn't moving, just standing there, waiting. My heart stopped. I froze, unsure of what to do. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he lifted the stick and began to tap it against a tree, a slow, deliberate rhythm that sent a jolt of fear through my body. I took a step back, and he stopped. Silence. I took another step, and he took a step forward. I turned and ran. I ran like I've never run before, my legs burning, my lungs screaming for air. The tapping followed me, relentless, growing louder and louder until it was all I could hear. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, my feet pounding against the ground, branches whipping against my face. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually, the tapping faded, the sound swallowed by the forest. I kept running until I burst out onto the main road, my chest heaving, my body trembling. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. When I finally looked back, there was nothing. Just the trail disappearing into the woods, the trees standing silent and still. I never found out who, or what, was in those woods with me. I haven't been back to that trail since. And now, whenever I go hiking, I can't help but listen for that sound, that slow, rhythmic tapping, somewhere in the distance. And every time I hear a branch snap or a leaf rustle, I wonder if it's just the wind, or if something is still out there, waiting.